1 hour and 10 minutes, my life went from believing everything is going to be okay, me and my wife are rebuilding our marriage, just gone. I was leaving work and she called me and said, "Hey babe, I feel like I'm having a panic attack." And so I said, "Well, just pull over and just stay there and I'll come and we'll drive together." She got out of the car. She was just gonna get in the back seat to sit with Elsie. And that's when the phone cut out. She passed out. So I called back and Elsie answered the phone and said, "Daddy, Mama fell down. She's having a panic attack." I said, "Okay, I'm on my way. I'm right there." I got there and I saw my wife laying on the ground and I just knew that it wasn't right. But again, going back to the hope and just be, nope, everything's gonna be okay. And so I trying to feel for pulse. At the same time, I'm trying to tell my daughter, like, "Hey, Mama's gonna be okay." When we got to the hospital, they let me go back in with her, and the sounds of them working on her, like I can still hear my wife's ribs breaking from them doing chest compressions. And I held her hand and I was praying. I swear, man, she came back. She had come back enough to just
say goodbye.
And then that's when they called it time of death, 12:20. It was 1 hour and 10 minutes from when she had called me.
This is an interview with James Dykes. James is an incredible man. And on this episode today, we talk about a story and an experience that he had just over a year ago where he received a phone call from his wife, who then would pass out while they were on the phone call and ultimately would pass away within the next day. This is a heavy story. It's emotional. We talk about James's life now, being a single father, how he copes with the trauma that he dealt with through this experience. We talk a lot about his relationship with God and how that's really helped him, I think, fight through some of these trials and this trauma that he has. Welcome to the Roller Coaster Podcast. Strap in. James Dykes, welcome to the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Hell yeah, man. This has been my life. I'm just happy to be here.
I appreciate you flying out to come on the show. And, you know, this is a unique episode for those who are watching visually. It's the first episode we've ever done outside of the studio. And so we're doing it in my backyard.
Love it.
Here in the Scottsdale area in Arizona. And I appreciate you coming on, James. I want to show you a photo, and I'd like to just see what emotions come up when you see this photo.
So that was our last date night that we got to have. It was supposed to be, it was right between Valentine's Day and my birthday. And man, just what's funny is that we actually got into kind of a fight in our last date, and it was just more of a misunderstanding and disagreement that we had. So for me, I look at that and I see a lot of love. I see a lot of misunderstanding of what life is and life was at that point. It's overwhelming. That's probably the biggest feeling. It's like a grabbing in my chest whenever I think about those tender moments that we had and what all that it entailed, and then what was just around the corner, you know, what was just around the river bend, you know, going, yeah. I Got Young Girls, the Pocahontas song. But, man, life was not perfect. Life was not, we had so many things that were going on, but man, we're did we have it all and when we had each other, you know? And that was the beauty of our connection, was that we knew that, and the circumstances that we were dealing with at that time also galvanized this connection that we had. I don't know how off on a tangent you want me to go, but my wife and I, so we both had a lot of things that we navigated through in our lives, and for me specifically, a lot of different traumas and different things that occurred, and never really understood how they manifested in me in negative ways. You know, I always have been someone that tries to look for the light, look for the hope, look for the good things, and try to put my focus there, focus on the positive. But what was uniquely interesting about my wife and my journey is that I was always focused there, but then our life experiences that we had brought a lot of suffering and trauma into our relationship. We had our daughter, Elsie Joy, who's 6 years old and just this amazing girl, gonna turn 7 on Sunday. She had a growth on the back of her neck when she was in the womb, and it's called a nuchal translucency, but it can be a leading indicator for a lot of congenital disorders and different things. And so, long story short, through that journey of navigating those different things, it brought a lot of suffering for my wife, and a lot of suffering related to what could be associated with her birth. And I really struggled to connect with her and sit with her and what she was dealing with and what the fears that were coming up and manifesting, because I just wanted to focus on the good and the light. And I share all this because it's so connected to our story, but I wasn't able to sit in the mess with her in those moments. And, you know, I kind of was learning how to, but I didn't know how. And, you know, daughter was born, 50 days in the NICU. It was a crazy journey for us, but we made it through. And then we, you know, continued to raise our daughter. And it was interesting for me, Tyler, because then a couple years later, my wife and daughters got into a car accident. They were T-boned going down the road. Thankfully, they all walked away okay. But again, a very traumatic situation that led to some post-traumatic stress that my wife was trying to navigate through. And because of my only focusing on the hope, only focusing on the good, what it did is it cut off our intimacy and connection, because I wasn't able to just sit in it with her.
Yeah.
And so I share all that because, long story short, that's what set me on the path and the course to start really unpacking a lot of my life and a lot of the things that happened to me, because I realized that they were manifesting in a very negative way to where I couldn't even show up and be what my wife was needing me to be. I was always trying to fix it, you know, the typical male mentality. And what's so interesting is that through that journey, it led me to be able to sit with my suffering, be able to fully realize what my experience was, instead of just extending grace and kind of, which is a beautiful thing, but at the same time, if it's robbing me of the truth of the situation, then it's not really an accurate perspective associated with life, because it's like, oh, you're only seeing one side.
Yeah.
And so I feel like what Krista gave to me more than anything was a shift in perspective and what love really is. And love is messy. And I was busy worried about what things would look like, or, you know, oh, everything's gonna be fine, you know, just trying to placate, you know, and continue to allow us to move forward. But at the same time, I couldn't sit in it with her. And so what's interesting is that journey after is what really helped me to unpack a lot of my traumas and a lot of my own stuff and sit in it. And what it's allowed me to do now is to make more space, for my girls now. I thought that journey was going to lead us to, what it would look like. Like, I thought that the investment that I was being made in myself to understand how to wrestle with my fears and still express love fully to them, I thought that was for my wife. And, it's crazy because probably 2 to 3 weeks before my wife passed away is when we finally, it was like all of a sudden our relationship had gotten to the point where I knew that she just fully trusted me again. Because when you're not able to meet someone and sit in the mess with them of what's going on, what ends up happening is they just end up, they feel like they're being fixed, or they're not right, or they're not good enough, or they're not able to, be whatever it is that you want them to be, and you're trying to push them to get better. And I mean, of course they want to get better. All of us inherently have a desire to be our best self, but we can't do that unless we're actually honest and fully transparent with our experiences. And the reality was I was too afraid of my own stuff to then show up for others in their stuff. And so it's been so interesting to kind of unpack those details, because it's been the most heart-wrenching thing, to be honest, because, it's like, shit, man, I thought this was for my wife and I, and now she's just gone. So
I think it's cool that you've recognized that a lot of that work that you've done does serve a purpose, and you've really channeled it now, I think, primarily to your children. And, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about your purpose now and why you've chosen to live on, right? Because I think there are so many who, when they lose, unexpectedly a spouse, it takes them down a path that's really, really dark and sometimes ends with suicide, right?
Yep.
So the photo that I showed, by the way, for those listening, not watching, was the last selfie that James took with his now deceased wife, Krista, on their last date. And what you just got to hear was James really just unpacking, a lot of his emotion and his feeling in looking at that photo.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I feel I'm still settling into this moment. And so
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to, look, I think guests like you, it's easy to want to create a certain sort of narrative on these podcasts. And it's one of my gifts, but sometimes I think it's okay to just let you go. And I think that's helpful and it's therapeutic. And so as much as some of this is for an audience, it's more for you, right? So I'm happy to just be here and sit with you and go through this.
No, I appreciate it, man. It's interesting, life's a mixture of joy and sorrow. My uncle, and I think it's really interesting. It's my uncle who lives in Denmark, happens to be an atheist, or claims to be. But what I think is funny is that he actually gave me that quote as life is a mixture of joy and sorrow. And that has been something that has helped me more in this last journey, this last year, than anything, just to have really what life is. Like, we live in a culture that only wants to highlight the good. It's all about the joy, the excitement, the woohoo.
Yeah.
And then you have what life really is.
It's predominantly not.
It's predominantly not.
Yeah.
It's predominantly something that you're constantly going like, what the is going on? Like, okay, how am I going to navigate
Yeah.
through this? What is, and it's like, but then you're always measuring yourself against this other, like, oh, but why am I not? Like everybody else looks around like they got it all together. And it's like, no, that's bullshit. That's a
Yeah.
facade.
For sure.
It's something that they built up to make them, it's a mask. It's what we do. We put on the mask all the time to just like, oh, everything's okay. Well, the problem is that things aren't okay most of the time. And we all deal with suffering constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, your kid goes and riding their bike and they fall down and skin their knee. I mean, that's suffering. And we show up for them and we make space but the reality is that never stops.
Yeah.
We still, as me, I don't feel any different as a person now. I mean, maybe a little bit more developed in the brain, as far as making decisions and the executive, the frontal lobe working a little better than it did as a young kid. But the joy, the spirit, the inner, it's the same. It's the same as it was then as it is now. But we get this idea as we get older that somehow or another life is, no, we don't talk about that. And I think what's interesting to me is that it goes back to the way we were conditioned as kids. It's the programming we got when, and it's one of the reasons that we do things so differently. I mean, I don't know what your childhood was like, but for me, when emotions came up, they weren't received well. It was more like, hey, go pull yourself together,
Suck it up.
Suck it up. Exactly. Gosh, get out of here with that. Like, can't you see that I'm busy over here? Like, come on. And what does that do? It just instills in us that our emotions and specifically our sadness is not accepted. It's not welcomed, and you need to go deal with it. Well, now we're a bunch of adults walking around in life that we know is not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah.
And yet we're going, why do we have so much suicide? Why do we have all these things? Because I've been asked and had projections of other people's fear constantly, and that's never remotely crossed my mind in the last year.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, do I not want to be here anymore at moments? 100%. Because the weight of carrying not only my daughter's hearts, but also trying to navigate my own stuff of what I'm doing is the most excruciating pain and weight. And then to constantly be measured against, like, are things getting back to normal or this? I mean, and I would just say to them, like, normal? Like, what I'm experiencing right now is my new normal. And so I'm going to allow space for myself to feel everything that I feel. And sure, that might scare you, but that's your fear. That's not mine. This is something that is, in order for me to know what is to come and to actually be authentically real and have joy in what that is, then I need to actually be able to make the space for myself to feel all of it, to feel the depths of my pain, because that is the best and most honoring thing that I can do for my wife and what she was for me and what she continues to be for me, because even though she's not here anymore, the love and the energy and the fabric of who she was is now still within us. It's still in my daughters. It's still around us in all the beautiful ways that she has shown up and continues to show up.
That's awesome. What day was it March 1st?
Yeah.
That your wife passed away? So ironically enough, I don't know if I shared this with you, but when my wife almost passed away, it was also March 1st of 2022. So it was 1 year prior to, you were 2023, right?
2023.
This was last year.
Yeah.
Can you describe, sort of in detail, what led up to March 1st, and maybe from the moment you woke up to the time you went to bed on that day, maybe just describe for the audience what happened. I want to say thank you to our newest sponsor, Jovi Health. I, first of all, love the founder. She was on the podcast. She's a friend of the show, Kim Olson. And this product is actually incredible for a lot of reasons. So when she came in on the podcast, she gave me one of their kits, okay? And these are basically these little strips that are like infused with some type of compound that can alleviate pain in men and women, right? So for women, it's predominantly used in menstrual cycles. But for me, I had lower back pain. And so she said, hey, put this on your back, wear it around for a few days and see how you feel. And it's actually legit. Like, it works incredibly well. And so I've been super happy with the results. I've asked Kim to actually get me like bigger slabs of this stuff because it's helped alleviate, some lasting back pain that I've had for years. And so go check out Jovi Health. We'll have a code down below in the description, and you're not going to be disappointed by doing that.
Yeah. So I'm going to start the day prior. So it was February 28th. And my wife had been, she had gone to a occupational therapist for herself because she was really interested in just body work and different things. She was on this healing journey herself, and she was just exploring and kind of seeing. And I'll never forget this because she came home and she said that it was a specific therapy called MNRI, and it's basically like almost reflexology, kind of making sure that the signals that are being sent with your nervous system from your brain are actually translating within your body the right way. And it's pretty interesting work. But she went to this person and went through a session, and at the end of it, the person told her that she's like, it's almost like your body is trapped in two different states. I see your body trying to close in and kind of going into the fetal position in some ways to protect. But I also see this aspect within your neck and everything where you're fighting and you're stretching towards something more. And I was just blown away, when she told me that, because I was just like, man, that's so interesting, because I didn't know a lot about the therapy at that point. But to then know that the next day, she legitimately, her spirit was leaving her life, was leaving this body that she had, that had carried her. So anyways, so started that day. March 1st started just like any other day. I got up early. I was out the door by 5:30. That's when I work. My wife was a stay-at-home mom starting some interior design stuff, and I'm really wrestling with trying not to I'm avoiding the topic. So I was at work, and I was actually getting ready to leave work because my wife was actually taking our daughter Elsie to an MNRI appointment because she was like, man, this was so interesting. Elsie's going too. So I was leaving work, and she called me and said, hey babe, I feel like I'm having a panic attack. I feel really pressure in my chest. I'm having a hard time catching my breath. And she was about 3 minutes away from my office, and so I said, well, just pull over and just stay there, and I'll come and, we'll drive together. And so I asked her, just stay on the phone with me. It's going to be okay. Just breathe, and she got out of the car to she was just going to get in the back seat to sit with Elsie. And that's when the phone cut out. She had passed out in the transition from the front seat to the back seat. And so I called back, and I No answer. I called back again, and Elsie answered the phone and said, "Daddy, Mama fell down. She's having a panic attack." And I said, "Okay, just stay there. I'm on my way. I'm right there." And then somebody that was across the way in the parking lot had run over and said, "Hey, can I talk to whoever's on the phone?" And I don't remember their name. I wish I did. Because and she said, "Okay, I saw what happened. I called 911, and I'll stay here with your daughter until you get here." And so, probably 2 to 3 minutes passed. I was there. I got there and I saw my wife laying on the ground, and I just knew that it wasn't right, that she was not okay. And I just had this gut feeling that she wasn't going to make it. And it was, but again, going back to the hope and just nope, everything's going to be okay. And so I started trying to help, just feel for pulse, trying to check for vitals. At the same time, I'm trying to tell my daughter, like, "Hey, Mama's going to be okay. Like, I know you're really upset. I know this is scary. Just, we're going to be okay." And then I don't know, probably in the next 2 to 5 minutes, the ambulance got there. They started asking me all the questions. And so I told them all the stuff, jumped in the car, and was just trying to hold and comfort Elsie. And, they loaded her up in the ambulance, went there. When we got to the hospital, I just followed the ambulance behind him. I wasn't leaving so I just put on my emergency flashers and followed him like 2 feet behind the whole way. And when we got there, I didn't know it at the time, but it was actually the chaplain met us at the door. And so they're taking me, they're talking to us about, "Hey, your mom's going to be okay." They didn't say that, actually. They had somebody there to, be with Elsie. And then as soon as we left Elsie, that's when they told me that your wife is not doing okay. They're currently administering life-saving procedures on her. And at that point, man, I blacked out. I don't remember the next 10 minutes or so. I just, so much confusion, so much anger, so much like, "What are you talking about, my wife?" And then I could hear him in there working on her. And so I got on the phone, called my wife's brother, and told him, and then what was going on, just to try to have somebody be aware of what's happening, because it's just shit's hitting the fan and I don't know what's going on. And so after I talked with him, he started calling people and trying to rally. And I'm sorry, man. This is really hard. I finally asked the nurse, like, "Can I just be in there with her? Like, I'm sitting out here in the hallway by myself. Like, what is going on?" And they let me go back in with her. And the sounds of them working on her are so ingrained in me. Like, I can still hear my wife's ribs breaking from them doing chest compressions and trying to save her life. And And I held her hand and I was praying and I was doing everything that I could think of to doing everything I could to try to save her. And I swear, man, she came back. I heard the blip on the monitor. I felt her come back, like the energy. I felt something change, and it was for like 10 seconds, and it was almost like she had come back enough to just
Say goodbye.
say goodbye. And then that's when they called it time of death, 12:20. It was 1 hour and 10 minutes from when she had called me and told me that she was having a panic attack. 1 hour and 10 minutes. My life went from, believing just believing everything is going to be okay. Me and my wife are rebuilding our marriage. We're rebuilding the foundation of what we're going to build and provide for our kids. Just gone. And I mean, it still just makes me shake and just want to crawl out of my skin, but I have to remember to hold the baby.
Thank you to our sponsors over at Bucked Up. I love this company. I love their products, their apparel, and their supplements. Recently, they dropped the mother of all pre-workouts, Mother Bucker. This is not for the faint of heart. This will make you want to claw your face off. So don't get stuck in traffic when you're headed to the gym. I love these guys. I love this company, and I love their products. They are clearly the best tasting pre-workout on the entire market, and they're number one for a reason. Bucked Up is my favorite workout brand, hands down. And they also have my favorite apparel for working out and just for daily life. It's Lululemon-like quality, but for a fraction of the price that's affordable. So head over to their site, buckedup.com, where you can check it out. And for 20% off their entire site, use the code TylerHall20. He's referencing the mic. The mic.
Sorry.
Is in his cradled arm here.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you sharing that story. That's yeah, man, that's I just can't imagine the thoughts and the feelings that you had during that time, and I can't imagine what she was going through as she was just fighting to hang on. And
yeah.
How did this change you? How's your perspective on life maybe shifted since that happened?
I mean, in every way, it made, it's made me wrestle with the realities of what life is. It's made me wrestle with you don't truly understand what you have until you lose it. And so I gotta be honest, Tyler, I'm kind of struggling right now, man. I'm having a hard time. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so I went through an accident, right? That was not even close to the same thing, but there was a moment in time, there was several hours and even several days to precede that where it was pretty clear that my wife was going to die, right? So even though she lived through that experience, it changed everything. It changed my entire perspective on life. And one of the main things that I talk about in that shift, and I'm curious if this is the case for you, is the way that I prioritized my time and my life was very much wrong prior to. And then after, I realized, like, dude, life is a gift. Like, every day is a gift. Every breath is a gift. You know, you said something like, you don't know what you have until it's gone, right? And so just really curious, like, how did your mindset or perspective on life, like, how is it different today than it was a year and 2 months ago when things were seemingly swimming along in your life and things were good, right?
Yeah. I think that it's made me be a lot more intentional. The reality is that I went from being able to play man-on-man defense, went from a parental standpoint to a kid standpoint, to now being this playing zone, and having to navigate through literally everything. The things that my wife would take care of and just naturally was part of her expression of, helping to do all the logistics. She breathed life into everything that happened. And to now be holding and having be the one to carry everything. The cooking, the cleaning, the fathering, the trying to go back to work and figure out what do I even care? Like, it's made me wrestle on like an existential level of why do we do what we do?
Yeah.
Because when I had nothing to give, I had to be so thoughtful and with my energy and where am I going? What am I directing this towards? Because I have to figure out what's the most important.
Yeah.
And so it made me wrestle with, why do I do this? Why do I do that? What's motivating me, this reaction? What's motivating this response?
Yeah.
And for me, I've always been someone that tries to lean into love and express love. But it exposed in me where my love had gaps. It exposed for me where where the motivation behind my actions was based in fear instead of based in openness and love.
Yeah.
And what's the most crazy thing is because the experiences of losing my spouse and losing Krista, it closed me off in the craziest way, because I was so afraid of what was going on. I was afraid of, not doing it right, not being enough, honestly, which has become part of the biggest thing that I talk about now, is that you are enough. We are enough. I didn't wear my sweater, which is funny because that's what I wear all the time. And it's one of those you are enough sweaters. And dear person behind me, the world's a better place with you in it. Love the person in front of you, just because the world needs more love.
Yeah.
But what I found is that a lot of the things that I was doing were motivated in fear and not necessarily in love.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things that it led me on this crazy ass path to wrestle with my faith, to wrestle with what I actually truly believe, and how does it correlate to my experiences in life? How does it allow me to lift up and nurture my kids and help them navigate through their grief and their sadness? And one of the things that about me that I realized super early in the journey after losing my wife is that it was the same pain that I had felt losing my brother. So I lost my brother to a drug overdose when I was 17. And it was a traumatic loss, super sudden, but what I was able, by going through that as a 17-year-old kid and then not losing my wife last year, is that I was like, I've felt this before. I've felt this pain before. But the reality is that not with the amount of associations in my life like I had with my wife, because I had built my everything around my wife, like every fiber of what I did was motivated in a way to try to support and love my wife and love my kids. And shit, man, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
What's the here's an important one, I think. As you describe, like finding purpose and asking yourself a bunch of really hard and deep questions, and you probably went down a pretty, sometimes dark, sometimes light journey of introspective questioning for yourself. Did you ever just ask the question, like, what is this all for?
Yeah.
And like,
constantly.
What conclusion, if any, have you come to, or are you still trying to figure it out?
I think that for me, I've figured out that life's a mixture of joy and sorrow. I mean, realistically, that's been the root. And oh man, there's so much I want to say, but one more time, Tyler. I'm sorry.
What's this all for?
What's this all for? It's all for love, man. That's what it's all for. I mean, the reality is that the grief and the sorrow that I feel is the love that I have that I no longer have to place somewhere because my wife is no longer physically here. But the love is still there. The love is still inherently within me, and it's coming out as an expression of sadness and grief, and now it's starting to come out in expressions of hope and joy because of what we have been able to navigate through. But the reality is that there's always both sides to everything, like going through the different experiences that my daughters and I have this last year. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there's been some beautiful, amazing moments that we've been able to experience. But every experience also has that gut-wrenching sting of, and yet we don't have her here to share it with us.
Yeah.
We don't get to hear her, how proud she is of the things that the girls are doing and accomplishing. We don't get to hear her. We just don't get to have her. And so everything that you go through, everybody wants to kind of see the good in it, and like, oh, look at that. Was that really good? And you're like, yeah, it was actually it was a great experience, but it's also underneath all what you see is still this deep grief and sadness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that if there's anything, it's helped me to be a lot more open and connect with others, to connect with the broken and the suffering, because I just don't want people to suffer alone. I mean, whether it's a person sitting on the street, that doesn't have something to eat, man, I want to go give them something to eat, because you know what? My suffering is different than yours, but right now I can meet that. Like, that's something that I can tangibly do, and that makes me feel good, to be able to help someone else. And so I think that if there's any purpose that's been found in this, it's that my expression of love is now more whole.
Yeah.
It's more whole because I didn't run away from my suffering and act like everything is okay and act like, oh no, everything's fine. And that was intentional. It was intentional for me, and it was also intentional because I wanted to model something different for my girls so that they didn't feel like, because they're walking around with people that are also wanting to get back to normal, the reality is we all want to find that normal, and, just because that's our comfort. We find comfort in the normal because it's like, okay, I know how this goes. And so when you go through something as traumatic as my girls and I have, and so many others too, but you try to walk through and express yourself authentically, and then you're constantly met with people that want to just get back on their normal, and it grates against them.
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, I want my girls to know that they can express themselves. They can be open. They can, if they feel like crying, they need to cry. I got space for that. If they have joyful moments and silly moments, man, I got space for that. And they might happen within a 15-second span. And it's this crazy whiplash. But the reality is that if that's how I'm feeling on the inside, then that's probably what they're feeling too. So I've just been vocalizing the things that I feel so that they know that they can also express and vocalize what they feel, and inviting it. And so, honestly, man, that's been probably the most beautiful part of this journey for me, is finding that purpose and realizing that the seeds that I'm sowing into my girls and the life that we're trying to cultivate of authenticity, and that authenticity means it's all the things, it's all the expressions, because love makes space, man.
Yeah.
Love is patient, love is kind, love is gentle. It keeps no record of wrongs. And so there's been so many situations that have happened where, a disappointment occurs or whatever. And my girls, my oldest has said things that are deeply cutting, like there's been times where I've disappointed her and I wish you were the one that died. And to be the one sitting there supporting and being like, you know what, I can understand that. You're not my biggest fan right now, and that's okay. But to then still make space, because that's what love does. Love is patient, love is kind, love is gentle. It keeps no record of wrongs. That's not wrong. That's just you're pissed off and you want to, express it, and you're angry. But really, anger is just the surface level emotion that you're feeling right now. Really, what's underneath it is that you're feeling suffering because you're disappointed. Yeah. And then that leads you to the deeper suffering, which is there, and it becomes the outlet for you to express it. And sometimes I got to be the punching bag,
I think one of the greatest gifts of, going through what you went through, the sudden death of a spouse, or even what your daughters went through, the sudden death of a parent, is that, their rock bottom or the trauma that they've dealt with will be greater. Your trauma that you've dealt with will be greater than what most humans ever have to deal with. And so what does that mean? It means that your spectrum of understanding is greater than most, right? So when you come across people who are going through it, their own version of a roller coaster, their own version of rock bottom, well, you've been deeper. And so it means that your ability to empathize and so I love that you have this approach of like, dude, everybody's going through something hard. And if you can just provide a little bit of hope and a little bit of light because you've been there, like that's incredibly meaningful way to live your life.
Amen, dude. I can't tell you. It's so interesting to me because so many people would try to, talk to me about what they were going through, and everyone would they were worried about probably offending me or, upsetting my heart or something, but they would start to talk about things that they've gone through or suffering that they've gone through. And I would always tell them hey, you don't have to do that. the reality is that you're trying to open up and express and connect with me on what you've dealt with, and you're just trying to relate with me. And there's no weighing.
Yeah.
There's no weighing suffering.
It's all relative.
It's all relative.
Right. Yeah.
It's exactly it. It's like me losing my spouse. I would never wish on anyone ever. But I'm still here and my daughters are still here. And so we have to figure out how to authentically live through this experience.
Yeah.
And sit in the mess of it all so that our joy can be real later, like it's just interesting, man.
I have this take online that I want to share with you. I don't know if you saw it, but I was on somebody else's podcast, and
Okay.
I was sharing my story, and at some point he asked me some sort of question about, like, man, you have 4 kids, what's that like, blah blah blah. And I basically have this take that's been seen now a couple million times or something. and it's very controversial.
Okay.
Right.
Like
so you
it.
have like this war happening in the comments, right? And the take is something like this. I basically say the hardest job in the world is being a mother.
Mm-hmm.
By like
100%.
a magnitude of 10. Like, it's not even close. And I like look at the camera and I'm like, all you men out there that think you have a hard job, like, try being a mom for a day. Like, it's the worst.
You do not have a hard job.
Right. And then I'm like, hey, and by the way, because of that, like, when you get home, I don't care how tired you, like, pitch in, help out. Like, just help out around the house, right?
100%, dude.
So I want to ask you this. You agree? It seems like you agree.
100%.
What's like the hardest part now that you're never going to be their mom? Okay, I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're filling certain roles that Crystal, your wife, used to fill.
Mm-hmm.
What's like the hardest 1 or 2 things that you just didn't really appreciate enough until like you got put in this situation where you had to play both sides?
Honestly, it was she was so good at organization and having different systems in place for the way it would flow and the process that things would go through. So like figuring all that out, and we had moved 2 months before or 3 months before she passed away. So we hadn't even fully moved into our house. So I didn't know where things were. I mean, it was like, I felt so lost in the logistics of everything.
Yeah.
Because it was like, well, I don't even, how did she do that? Why would she do it that way? What is happening? And what I found was that I was constantly trying to do it exactly like Krista would have done it.
And just couldn't.
And I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it, one, because it wasn't my style and wasn't me. And so that's one of the things that I had to figure out, is that I have to figure out how this works now, all the different things, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, all the things that are, just have to keep going, like, it doesn't matter if you're feeling like shit and gonna lay on the floor and cry. Your kids still need clean clothes, so you better figure it out. And so, clothes used to be always folded and put away, and now that Dad is doing everything,
folded and put away.
I would say most of the time they might get folded, but they're probably going to stay in the basket.
Yeah.
There's things related to how we used to manage, like, having the girls clean their rooms and do different things were a big deal before, and I've just kind of been like, hey, that's your space.
Yeah.
It's your safe space. If you don't mind it, okay. But I am going to help you to understand that when you can't find your stuff and you want Daddy's help, that, hey, this would be a lot easier if you did put your stuff away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just helping them to translate the impact. It's like, okay, I want them to understand the cost of whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so in those moments, again, I would, the first probably like 6-8 months, I kind of just took all responsibility, all extra burden off of them, because I was like, they're already dealing with enough. So I made their beds, I cleaned their rooms, I did all the things like Krista would have done them,
Yeah.
and exhausted myself. But I was also like proving to myself that I could do it, because I didn't want somebody else to come in and just take over. I didn't want somebody else to come in and do the things that were inherently, I knew I was the most prepared to do, because I knew my girls' hearts the best. I knew the way we did things. And if somebody else came in, they wouldn't have been intimately connected in the same way.
Yeah.
And I've always been really focused on being a servant leader. And so a servant leader is in the fray. They're in the mess. They're doing it. They're showing up and actually putting in the work. And for me, it was like this. It was almost like I don't know. I just kind of come back to I had to prove it to myself to understand what I was truly capable of.
Yeah.
And I think that going back to what you said about all the men and, that showing up, I think that men are so much more capable of expression and sensitivity and being in the works. Like, we shouldn't be putting everything on our wives and making them do all the things and just kind of showing up, making the money, doing, I mean, like that's such a bullshit narrative that so many people believe.
Yeah.
Like if you want to connect and you want to have those things in the relationships, you got to be in it. You got to be showing up constantly.
Yeah.
And it's showing up in tangible ways. It's showing up in, cooking, cleaning, doing the things that were really actually help, take the burden off your wife and your spouse, and you still have them. So do it. There's nothing that I wouldn't give. I've thought about this, like, even to have my wife yell at me again, just get pissed off at me, like, what I wouldn't give.
It would just be awesome.
It would be awesome.
Yeah.
To just have her just say, James, what the f are you doing? Like, I mean, obviously I'd rather have a lot of other things, but even that, like,
That'd be great.
It would be great.
Yeah.
It would be great. So, I mean, if there's anything, it's appreciate what you have. It's because it can go hour and 10 minutes, man.
Yeah.
Hour and 10 minutes.
I want to read this scripture.
Yes.
You wrote this, by the way.
I did.
And then I want to ask you about your relationship with God.
Okay.
The scripture is Matthew 18, 2-5. It says, "For an answer Jesus called over a child, whom he stood in the middle of the room, and said, I'm telling you once and for all, that unless you return to square one and start over like children, you're not even going to get a look at the kingdom, let alone get in. Whoever becomes simple and elemental again, like a child, will rank high in God's kingdom. What's more, when you receive the childlike on my account, it's the same as receiving me." Does that scripture mean anything to you?
In so many ways, man. Because the thing is that the kingdom of God is righteousness, peace, and joy. It's so interesting to me because righteousness comes by our knowing that we have right standing. Jesus came as a savior. He died on the cross, redeemed what was lost. That's one narrative that comes out, and I'll share another one here in a minute. But what I found the most interesting about just the kingdom of God specifically is that it's peace and joy. Those are experiential, emotional aspects, and that graded against a lot of the things that, graded against some religious pretense that have been spoken, like we walk by faith, not by feelings. That's always been something that I struggled with in different organizations that are focused on religion. Because it's like, well, wait a second. But he said the kingdom of God is righteousness, peace, and joy. Like, wait, that doesn't, I cannot compute. A plus B doesn't equal C in the statement that you made. And so, I don't know, man, the childlike, it's, for me, it's opened my eyes to realize the gaps that society has, and that I have and had, related to what life's all about. Because I lived for so long it's about moving up in my job, just continuing to climb the ladder in my company, and, make some more money to provide for my family. And, this is what it's about. But no, actually, my wife and I came together. We had sex, which translates into making babies. At least when you get to go up to the majors. Sometimes you just play in the minors for a while, but then when you're blessed with the ability to step up into the majors and have a baby, it's like that was an intentional decision. That was something that has now expanded the fabric of love that we were knit together from. It's expanded, that for me, love is like the root of everything. So I'll get into that, but.
Oh, that's cool. Listen, I think the scripture in Matthew 18, talking about becoming like a child, this is one of my favorite, I think, visuals in all of the scriptures. And it's referenced many times, right? Where Jesus says to become like a child. Mm-hmm. There are certain words that are often used in the scriptures when he describes what it's like to be a child. Mm-hmm. There's one that's not used, but that's maybe my favorite descriptor that I'm trying to be more of, mm-hmm. which is present. Mm-hmm. You think of the way that children are present. You watch them interact with their friends. You watch them play. You watch them laugh. You watch them cry. You watch the way that they interact with you, mm-hmm. right? Their parents, the way they interact with each other. They're incredibly present people. Mm-hmm. And I think the older that we get, and the more that, technology seems to hijack our ability to be present, it's that's one that I've definitely struggled a lot with. So that's one of the characteristics of children that for me is a work in progress, but one that I'm constantly striving to be better at.
Yeah. I think that's a huge one, man. The presence and the awe and the wonder is something else that I see in kids.
Yeah. Curiosity.
The curiosity, the not thinking that you have it all figured out.
Totally.
It's
a great one.
Because we don't, again, it's that we tell ourselves that we have things figured out, but it's just so that we can feel comfortable in the situation.
Yeah.
It goes back to that building this false narrative of, what what life is.
Yeah.
Versus the reality. And so if you can approach it from that awe and wonder of, I have no idea why this is happening or what's going to happen tomorrow, but that's part of the adventure of life too. And that's why if we can have that awe and wonder, and I've learned more of that from my kids and just being authentic and walking through stuff with this last year. And all the experiences, I've always tried to be a really present, engaged dad, but at the same time, it's like, no, I'm getting a lot from you guys just by the way in which you're seeing things from. Your unique perspective is different from mine because your life experiences have been different than I had at that age. And so I'm getting to learn right along with you and then ask them, like, what do you think? Like, what does this mean to you? What does that do, and why? And,
awesome.
it's just, and so what I've found is that's just one of the best ways to navigate is like, I don't got it all figured out, and that's okay. Yeah. I'm never going to have it all figured out. But if I can just keep working on my expression of love to allow it to be full, to be as unconditional as it can be. That's what I want, man. Like, I've always had this inherent feeling of my life is not my own. There's been these themes from a kid, like my life is not my own, which led me to be a people pleaser for a long time because I was too afraid to actually speak up and express myself fully, because I saw what happened to my older siblings when they spoke up and expressed. It was a little, ooh. So I was like, oh, well, don't do that. That's not accepted. So don't do that. But then that led me to believe that it was always about making everybody else's lives better, which I think is actually still a part of who I am. But it was only half-baked before, because I didn't sit in my suffering from my childhood to actually process it. I put a nice gold-plated a turd. That's what I feel like I did. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, this was a shit situation, but I'm just going to act like everything's okay. Yeah. And then eventually it'll be okay.
Yeah.
No, that's not really the way it works. It will manifest in your life in ways that you don't want it to.
Yeah.
And so, I think that I've really leaned into this idea that life's a garden. Our life is a garden. It's actually the earth that is within us, that, our bodies are made from the dust and they will return to the dust. And for me, I feel like that's the original piece of the garden. That's the story in the picture that I see, is like, that's the original intended design that we get to navigate through and redeem the earth within us, and it's all through the experiences that we have through our life. And our goal isn't just to everything to be good all the time. I mean, we like that, and it does feel good, but it's to be authentic. It's to be real. It's why this feels so good, is because you're around somebody else that's real, that wants to share the reality of it, not just float up here on the surface.
Yeah.
I
Dude, I love it.
I don't want to be a just the tip type of person, man. I want to go deep.
I love you.
I want to go,
What do you mean by that?
I mean, well, there's a lot of different expressions of that, Tyler, let me tell you. But this one's about the heart, Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I want to close on this, okay? So a lot of people out there going through it. They're going through their own version of rock bottom. They're on the roller coaster. Some days are good, some days are medium, some days are horrible, right? What's your just message of hope, for people who may feel like they're at rock bottom, they're really going through it? What's your message of hope for these people?
I would say that, first of all, I'm sorry for what you're going through. I hate the reality of the life that we live in, and the sorrow and the suffering that we all deal with. But I want you to know that you are enough to navigate through this, that there is, that you have probably dealt with a lot of people that haven't made space for you and your emotions. They haven't made the space to navigate through the mess with you. And it's not because they don't want to. It's just because they're too afraid to sit in the fray. They've been programmed to think things a certain way. And so if there's anything for me personally that I've found, is that if you can love yourself, if you can make the space to feel your feels, if you can have the courage to just keep breathing. I want to be very careful, because we live in this dynamic of just more, go, always, now. It's just constant like, oh, you need to do this and more, 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 more. No, what you need is space to breathe, space to feel, space to navigate through your fears, to allow the perfect love that you were created from to cast out the fears that are within. And the only way you can do that is by sitting with them, making space to feel it. And you're probably dealing with a lot of people that's going to go against the model that they believe is the right way. But I'm telling you, if you can just make space for your heart to feel, that is, I don't know. I have a picture and I have a story. I don't know how much time we have, but
Go for it.
I mean, the reality is that we navigate through life, and if you don't allow yourself to feel the feels of the pain and the sorrow and the suffering, then your love's only going to be half baked. And the reality is because if you look at a car, okay? If I look at a car and we take the engine out of a car, we don't assume that it's going to just run normally. Like we can connect the dots to say, oh, that car is not going to move. But yet somehow or another, we think that by locking in all of our emotions, locking everything down, is somehow or another the way that we were designed to operate, and that it's somehow or another going to translate into, this authentic, real, and like beautiful life. That is not truth. Yeah. Because the reality is life is a mixture of joy and sorrow. And if we don't allow ourselves to wrestle with the reality of what that is and process through it and navigate through it and love ourselves through it, well, then we are going to be like a car with no engine. Eventually it just fades away, man. You just
love it. Well, it was a fun, I don't know if that's the right word, but that was a really nice conversation. And I appreciate you opening up and being vulnerable and being here with me and joining the Roller Coaster podcast.
Yeah, man. You know what I realized though, as we're ending, that I didn't even talk about the stuff that we talked about on the phone. We did the thing where I opened up and talked on the phone, and then we never got there today, but that's okay.
That's okay.
We'll do it again.
Absolutely.